The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
It's the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. The Fargo hangover has subsided. Back in studio here in the wonderful confines of New Brighton, Minnesota, where you can check my Twitter at Jason M. Bryant each day to check the weather at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. This is the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. As you say, my Twitter handle says, I am Jason Bryant. Today, joined by the head wrestling coach at Wyoming Seminary, a college preparatory school. I believe that's the exact terminology there with Coach Scott Green. Scott, welcome to the program.
What's up, Jason? How you doing?
College preparatory, is that the way to term a school like Wyoming Seminary?
Wyoming Seminary College Preparatory School. That's correct. Yep. We're not in Wyoming, and we are not a seminary either.
But you are in the Wyoming Valley.
True. Little known fact: the state of Wyoming is named after the valley that we reside in here.
So before we even get there, I want you to you told me a story about a player from another sport who came there to do a post-grad year, not realizing that Wyoming Seminary, A, wasn't in Wyoming, and B, the school that was looking at him was not University of Louisiana Lafayette, it was Lafayette College.
Sure. So we work a lot with postgraduate athletes to help them prep for a year with a pretty rigorous academic program in a school, Lafayette, which is in the Lehigh Valley. Is the school that we partner with for football pretty regularly. And we had a young man from Texas a year or so ago who came up here on their recommendation and was ready to fine-tune himself academically and head down to Lafayette. So the first time he got in our vans to go visit Lafayette, he was a little confused as we were driving down the Northeast Extension to take him to Lafayette, Pennsylvania. He thought that he had been recruited by Louisiana Lafayette throughout the whole process. So it was a little bit of concern for him. I think he headed back to Texas about 2 weeks later.
And here's the shame. The shame about the whole situation. Had he gone to Lafayette, that degree at Lafayette College that's pretty good. I mean, that's no slouch of a school.
No question about it. That's our football players and our wrestlers. They're here for opportunities at Patriot League schools, opportunities at Ivies. We want to put together the whole package of a college applicant. So athletics is obviously a part of that, but without a doubt, he would have set himself up pretty well if he had gone down and played ball for Lafayette College.
I think they're the Leopards, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. That sounds correct. Yeah.
That used to be a thing. I used to know all the Division I mascots, but now there's way too many Division I schools to even keep up with that. And pay more attention to wrestling when we get to talking about Wyoming Seminary, just from a geographical standpoint. You guys are in Kingston, but so give somebody the lay of the land. Like, where exactly is Wyoming Seminary in relation to places they've heard of?
Yeah, so we're in Northeast Pennsylvania. Wrestling buffs should know we are right across the river from Wilkes-Barre. So Wilkes Open is kind of the Rose Bowl of college opens. So a lot of wrestling people have passed through there during their time. We're about an hour and 20 minutes south of Binghamton, New York, my famous kind of former stomping grounds up there. And we're about 2 hours from Philadelphia, 2 hours from the George Washington Bridge. So we're kind of nestled in Northeast PA, pretty accessible to a whole bunch of big cities.
And the dynamic of the school, I mean, it's a boarding school and it accepts day students, right? I mean, how does the general student body make up there at Wyoming Seminary?
We have about 180 boarders in our dormitories and about 300 day students. So it's a nice mix. Suburban campus. It's not going to be a lot of people come on their visits here and they think they're going to step off into the classrooms from the movie Dead Poets Society, rolling hills and fall foliage and stuff like that. We're nestled right in the community of Kingston in our little bubble here. So you can walk a couple blocks and go to Walgreens or just about any restaurant that you want to go to. You can walk off our campus and head over to those.
Yeah, so is the recruiting pitch there the Walgreens and the Damons? Is there a Damons in town? Because that seems to be a PA staple.
No Damons. Walgreens and CVS are right on the corner. Most of the kids that are looking at prep schools have a certain thing in mind, but we're no different than the college search. Some people want that rural kind of setting, and some people are looking for something that's a little bit more urban. We're more suburban than urban, but there's lots of things to do and lots of places to go to while you're here.
I want to dial it back a little bit before we get back on the SEM train. Is your background? You talked about Binghamton being your old stomping grounds. When did wrestling first enter your life?
Oh, pretty early on. I wasn't much of a competitor, but I knew from a young age that I wanted to coach something. And then I got involved in high school, middle school, high school wrestling, and that seemed to be the sport that I enjoyed the most. So I went to Binghamton back when we were the Colonials, the pre-Bearcat days. And I competed there, not very well, but I did compete there. And that kind of became where I knew that I was going to be a coach. So I got assistant jobs at a couple of local high schools and just kind of worked my way up through to, a bunch of years later, I'm here at Wyoming Seminary.
You also did spend some time coaching at your alma mater of Binghamton, and at this era, they were Division I. They were Division III, I'm assuming, when you were coming through.
Correct. Division III, while I was competing, they went through the process to move up. When I landed back there, when Pat Pop got the job, we were already Division I, and I was lucky to be a part of that staff with Pat Popolizio, Dennis Papadatos, Andy Saris, that kind of led the resurgence of the Bearcats.
Did you know that Pat Popolizio was destined to be a good coach in those early years?
Absolutely. I coached Pat actually on the New York State national team in the mid-'90s. 96, I believe, was his senior year of high school. And you knew then that he was a part of an extraordinarily passionate wrestling community with his brother Frank, his coach Joe Benna. And when he came back with circled around to apply for the Binghamton job, he had already been an American. He had worked his way through Sacred Heart in Army. And you just knew that he had picked up everything that he was going to need to take him to where he is, from mentors like Joe Benna and Mark Cody, Joe DeMeo, Frank Popolizio, guys like that he had been around his whole life. He had picked the good parts of all of those coaches, and you knew he was on his way up.
So kind of weird to go back and work for a guy that you coached?
I think it's pretty commonplace in wrestling, Sure. I mean, I didn't have a super tight relationship with him when he was in high school. I just was on the staff when he was a member of the team. But, I've coached with a bunch of guys that I spent a lot of time cornering for over the years as they grow up through it. And, it's maybe a little bit more commonplace than in other sports. And it's a new dynamic, but it's a lot of fun too.
Opportunity opens up at Wyoming Seminary. John Gordon had been the coach there, and then he left to go to St. Christopher's down in Virginia. That SEM position opens up. And what was enticing to you to first apply for this position and then eventually take it?
Well, I think, at the time I was coaching at Binghamton, and I was running the club. I was running Shamrock at the time, and John had brought guys up to our club because it's such a short distance away to train. So I'd gotten a decent picture of what the wrestling was like at Wyoming Seminary through kids like Nicky Gordon, through kids like the McMullins who were at SEM while I was at Binghamton. And then when the job opened up and I talked to John about it and came down to campus, we just saw it as a move for my family. I hadn't been in the classroom while I was at Binghamton University, so that was an opportunity to get back to teaching. And the opportunities for my kids at a global school where they were going to, go to school with kids from over 25 different countries, and the experience that my family could be provided. It was nice to have wrestling provide a vehicle for something for my family rather than just the kids that I coached for myself anymore.
So what do you teach?
I teach high school English. I teach upper-level English electives.
Oh, so of course you're extremely finicky with the written word. Now this makes sense based on your Twitter interactions with people. So I never actually asked you what you taught. Now that actually makes sense.
No. So some of the guys that I interact with on Twitter or in the wrestling world had to write papers for me. They'd be pretty miserable when they got them back. Just ask any of them that have gone through, my classes as well as my coaching. Yep.
A lot of red ink, right? A lot of red ink.
Well, it's more done on Google Docs now, so a lot of typing and comments and stuff like that. So yeah, but the same concept, making sure they're doing it right, getting it right.
One thing is when we talk about, the national preps and prep schools with wrestling programs, obviously the one that comes to mind to everybody that's been following wrestling, I don't know, for the last 30 years has been Blair Academy. And they go through a 6 days a week curriculum. What's the daily workload like for an average student at SEM?
Ours is 5 days a week. We don't have classes on the weekend like some prep schools. We have a pretty big student population, so we adjust our schedule according to them in the local area. But our students have that live in the dorms have a 2-hour study period every night, and more often than not, that's pretty full with work. And I imagine the day students at home are doing a couple hours of homework a night. And there's a tremendous expectation of academic rigor here. And some kids come in and are surprised by that. They think they're going to wrestling fantasy camp, and they have to adjust when they get here. But another thing about prep schools is they're very, very strong sense of community here. So they're provided with a lot of resources to match the expectation of more rigor.
One thing that also can be, people look at is the name seminary. I mean, how rooted in religious teaching is this school?
Not very much. Seminary was really just kind of a common name for a school in the Northeast in the 1840s when we were formed, 1844. Our kids do take a Bible class, but it is more of a history of the Bible kind of thing. We have a loose affiliation with the United Methodist Church, but more often than not, the religious aspects. I mean, we have kids from all over the world here, so there's all sorts of different denominations represented. So it's a small part of our history and a small part of our today, but no theology or anything like that.
So when we start creating a wrestling powerhouse here, what was the goal for you? I mean, was your goal to take out Blair Academy and win a national president? I mean, what was the first goal when you get there, and then when do you realize that okay, this has got some legs behind it?
Well, John laid such a strong foundation that I knew I was kind of starting on one of the top floors when we got here. So I think, sure, I've said this probably 100 times. Blair is maybe the best sports program in the country, bar none. Not just wrestling. We're talking about Blair Wrestling being one of the top sports programs in any sport. The way that they have been successful, they've won preps every year, except one since 1983. So we knew coming in that was a really tall order to be able to knock them off. But we felt like if we did things the way that we wanted to do them, and we attracted the right kids, that we could compete with them. That maybe it wasn't necessarily going to be winning prep nationals every year, but we knew that we had the tools here, the resources here, and the ability to attract the kids here, that we could compete. And so, we have. We've beaten them a couple times in the duels. We've won the Ironman. We've beaten them at preps. We haven't had the sustained success that they've had, but I think, the goal was to be able to compete against any program in the country. And I think, year 8 into it now, we've accomplished that.
There's so much discussion about the public versus private debate, and then you've actually got another element, you and Blair, similar with the boarding programs, and there's some like St. Edward's is not a boarding. They're part of the Ohio Association. You guys are kind of not part of the PIAA as far as I know, unless there's some dual affiliation. But when there's the argument about public versus private, then there's that another tier. How do you see this thing in terms of, we're arguing the top teams in the country. It's such a small percentage of high school wrestling. How do you kind of keep the wrestling fans and maybe your own staff and wrestlers grounded to realize, look, you're part of a special elite group here?
Sure. I think, every school has its own obstacles to success. So we want to compete against everybody. We think wrestling is a tremendous sport in that, you have the individual aspect of it. So if you go to a tournament like the Ironman, we want to see the best kids from all over the place. But my philosophy is when it comes championship time, we shouldn't be taking spots away from public schools or state placement and finishes away from them. We should be competing against schools like us. So that's why the Prep Nationals is a really good fit for us. So, we have the ability to go out and wrestle dual meets against schools from all over the country, whether they're public or private or not. But when it comes time for that championship time, we're going to be against schools that are like our own. Now, boarding school obviously has some advantages that you have no geographic boundaries, but there's a price tag that comes with it. And although we do have a strong financial aid program at Wyoming Seminary, people are paying a good chunk of change to come here. And other schools don't have that border. And if they're just day schools, they don't have that obstacle either. They do have tuition, but it's not the same as ours. So, with the good comes the bad, and the most successful programs are not any clear, like, these are the things that they do. They're the ones that overcome their own unique obstacles the best. And that's, how I think, our key to success is to know what we have limitations-wise, know what we have positive strengths-wise, and play to those strengths and eliminate the limitations as much as we can.
You brought up the fact that, private schools, there's no geographic border that they bring in like a school district does. And, the point of a private school is you have to bring people in. So that the word recruit gets thrown around a lot, especially with athletics. Putting it in a non-athletic terms, how does SEM go out to try to entice students to come to their environment? Because there's more to life than just sports. And, of course, all those kids that go there, not all of them are athletes. So the average student, how are they approached to come to Wyoming Seminary?
Well, we have a good fortune of having a lower school. So we do have some kids that come up through there. And those kids are kids whose parents at a young age made a choice that they were going to take a private school education and make it a priority for their family over a public school. At the high school level, we have a very, very active admissions team that travels internationally. We travel to school fairs all over the place in the country to be sure that we're represented. And we have a table in front of every kid that's considering a boarding school, so that we can tell our story of what it's like here in Northeast Pennsylvania, what type of students STEM has been putting out since 1844, and we're hopeful that we can get them onto campus, whether they're from Wisconsin or Harrisburg or Brazil or China, and they'll get here and they'll fall in love with it and they'll want to be a part of our community. And are some of those guys and girls wrestlers? Yeah, absolutely. But more often than not, like you said, they're just students who are looking for what we provide, and that's a strong education in a really unique situation.
It also looks like there's not really. You talked about the PG program, post grad program, sending players to Lafayette College. What I've noticed in wrestling is there doesn't seem to be any particular school that reaps the benefits of SEM wrestlers. They're across the whole gamut. I mean, my alma mater's got one. Then you've got them all over the Ivy League, all over the Patriot League, through the Big Ten. So, how do those relationships work with those college coaches, and what type of kid's going to go whether it's a state school in Virginia or an Ivy League school in Massachusetts?
Well, I think we're going to identify fit, and we're going to work hard on that as soon as the kid gets here. And some kids are meant for that Division I grind of the Big Ten, and some kids are looking for a bigger picture, and they want to go to a school that they feel like is going to support their wrestling career, but they know once they're done competing in college that's done for them, and they're looking for what that degree is going to mean to them. So I'm very fortunate to have coached at the college level for 4 years, and have built relationships with the guys that are now coming back to campus to recruit our kids. So, I have a little bit of a unique perspective in knowing coaches and who might be a good fit or a good match for some of our kids. We have a strong college guidance department that really works through the academics with them. I don't imagine there's too many college guidance counselors in the country that know just about every Division I wrestling coach by first name basis. So, it all works because of those things, and kids that come here are going to be pointed in the right direction, and then families that come here are going to be pointed in the right direction based on that experience and the kind of systematic approach we take to being sure that we're sending them to a good place.
We had talked in Fargo a little bit about, kids coming in, and the topic of reclassing comes up. I know sometimes that's a controversial topic when a guy or girl in some cases will get reclassed and they'll be competing in tournaments. Well, they were an 11th grader last year. How are they an 11th grader again? Explain why prep schools typically will reclass students coming in. I know you said that SEM doesn't usually take one-year kids. So explain how that works.
So more often than not, it'll be an academic concern or issue where if a kid wants to come in just for a senior year, we have some required courses that they have to take that won't all fit into a one-year plan. So they'll reclassify as a junior so that they can meet our graduation requirements. It'll happen in other things. It's really not dissimilar from the redshirting that a lot of public school kids do. It's
usually in the 8th grade.
Right. It's more officially endorsed by our school because it's been something that we've done, like I said, since the early 1900s, longer than most of the traditions that and systems that exist at a school like STEM are probably older than public high school education. So you take a kid who might be young for his grade, and they come here and they're going to reclass. You take a kid who maybe didn't have the best freshman year, they're going to come here and reclass. Now, when they reclassify, there's obviously some negatives for them. They are going to not be able to compete in public school events their senior year. So they still get the 4 years of eligibility from when they start ninth grade for those events. That doesn't change. And that's a huge misconception among a lot of people is they think, they're going to get an extra year of high school. They do in some respects, but a lot of that competition is very, very limited to times when we compete against other schools that are like us. So it's not like you can wrestle in the Beast of the East 5 times if you reclass at a school that does that. You still only get your 4 years of public school competition. It just gives them an opportunity to mature a little bit more. It's really popular amongst boarders who want to come here and going to foster a sense of independence in them. And it's been going on for years and years and years. So we're fortunate to still do that, I think. And I think it's been a real godsend to a lot of the kids who have come here to help them grow as individuals.
Again, circling back to that dreaded R word, and I'm not talking redshirt, I'm talking recruiting. So say a high-level wrestler inquires to you at an event. How do you handle that? Because some people might look at that and be like, oh, look at that coach, he's trying to get him to come to SEM or insert school name here. I mean, what are some of the misconceptions you have to deal with? And maybe coaches at Blair have dealt with the same thing for years. I mean, when somebody approaches you, how do you deal with it?
Well, we say, let's talk later, but I want to see your transcript before we go much further with this, and I'm going to send that over, and they're going to get involved in our admissions process. They're going to always, if we had the team of guys that came up to me at tournaments and said they wanted to come to SEM, we would never lose a match. But it's not a good fit. It's not a good fit for everybody when they find out that they're only going to get financial aid based on their need, that there's no merit scholarships, or their athletic scholarships that they're going to have to pay. And kids, I think, see the wrestling part of it and are sold, and want to come here. But there's a whole bunch that's got to happen between that initial kind of them seeking us out and them actually setting foot on campus and being in one of our classrooms. There's academic standards, there's SSAT tests, there's the family's kind of willingness to let go of their kid if they want them to board. There's the financial hurdles. There's all sorts of things that exist between A and B. And that's what we do. We immerse them in the process as soon as we can, and we yield the guys that really want to be here for the right reasons.
And it's not just guys, as we want to talk about the women's program that started there, of course, the girls that have come to Wyoming Seminary. And then, of course, Kevin Black also has kind of created not a similar situation, but there's kids out in the Midwest that have gone to River Falls High School. Both programs started kind of at the same thing. We've talked to Kevin about this on the show before, but let's just talk about the genesis of the idea for the women's program at SEM. I mean, how hard was this to set up? I mean, how quick were the administrators ready to jump on board with this?
I think they were pretty quick when we showed them what it would look like, and then we showed them that I would have a tremendous amount of support from the wrestling program, from the wrestling community. I've coached girls in clubs going back to my Binghamton and Shamrock days, and I knew what the character of a girl wrestler was. The sport has grown so much in the last decade that we knew that this was a need for our community, that we could take the kind of model that we built the boys program with, that John Gordon started and we continue to do, and apply that to the girls, that we could be successful and provide them with a high quality experience. So when I started to talk to Terry Steiner about it, he was all over it because he had been looking for something like this for years, when you can take the girls at 15 and 16 and kind of put your arms around them and have them there all the time and train them the way that we train our national team. And that's the biggest difference between the boys and girls programs at SEM, is that we're wrestling a folk style schedule and then obviously wrestling a lot of international styles outside of that. But Aaron and Adeline are training these girls for big freestyle competitions, events with an international kind of flavor to it. So, sometimes I look over when we're in our folk style practice, I'm really jealous of the opportunities that they have to train the girls, which in a way that really kind of makes sense for young athletes. And the girls that we brought this year are trailblazers. They're amazing. And they're going to have that distinction of being part of the first class of girls to come here and start this pioneer program under Aaron and Adeline. Couldn't be happier that they're with us.
Yeah, going back to what it used to be as far as when the women and the developmental athletes were at Northern Michigan, a lot of them would go up to Northern for their senior year in high school, and it's not the same setting. You got a public school and a college environment, whereas this one seems to be a lot more disciplined in terms of making sure that they're still kids. They're not surrounded by college athletes all the time and having distractions. So what is it like to deal with some of these kids who are away from home for the first time?
Terry immediately identified that as the determining factor, is that we're set up for this. We've got girls coming here from Pennsylvania and North Dakota, New York, and stuff like that. But we also have 14-year-old kids coming here from China and Korea. So we are set up to be a boarding school and provide support for kids who are living away from home. Northern Michigan doesn't have that. Our school is right across the street from their dorm. They're surrounded by kids on campus who are in similar situations to them in terms of living situations. And our dorms have adults that live in them. They have dorm parents. The community is built for that. It's built to have dinner with adults every night and have adult contact time after practice. So you really kind of have a school that's meant to, like most boarding schools are, help kids in the aspects of growth outside of the wrestling room. And our girls and boys have kind of moved right into that, and it's why we're so unique, is that this is what we're set up to do, and wrestling is just a part of that.
You touched on Aaron Vandiver and Adeline Gray and their presence in the program. One, how did you entice both of them to come to Kingston, Pennsylvania?
It was pretty easy. Aaron's a Pennsylvania girl, born and bred. So, she had been doing the assistant coach job out there for a long time. And I think talking to Terry, we felt like she was a good fit. So we wooed her. It's an opportunity for her to have her own program and still be feeding the program that Terry runs out there, and an opportunity for her to get back out to the East Coast and be closer to her parents. And then Adeline, I think, Aaron was probably her personal coach quite a bit of that run, So she was coming off an injury, and she wanted to do some of her training a little bit differently. So we were happy to kind of host her, and she has a tremendous amount of trust and comfort training under Aaron every day, and great partners with our athletes. So I think that it was a really kind of natural fit for everybody.
When it comes to coaching girls wrestling, do you see, you've coached girls, as you had said earlier, do you see a marked difference in how female athletes react to high-level female coaches compared to the looks that you might have gotten over the years?
I don't think the room part of it is that much difference. I think that we are very comfortable. The best part about this year is that I could jump in and run a girls' practice. Chad could. Any of our coaches could jump in and run a girls' practice, and Aaron or Adeline jump in and run a boys' practice, and no one would blink either way. And I think that part is pretty consistent. I don't remember who it was, but a few years ago I read a quote from a high level, I think it was a soccer player, that said, like, coach us like you coach the guys, but treat us like we're girls. And I think that's maybe where some of that difference is, a different dynamic dealing with an adolescent girl in often that kind of stuff. So I think that's the biggest difference. But I think if you walked into our wrestling room, and then a lot of people have, you wouldn't notice any difference between the way that any of us are coaching either the guys or the girls. But that's pretty consistent and stays the same. But sure, I think there's different relationships that need to be fostered off the mat when you're dealing with different genders of kids.
As far as a role model situation, how beneficial do you think it is for the young girls at SEM to see two women that have had success in wrestling leading the way for them?
I think it's great. I think that is a huge part of the draw, that they know, like Adeline I've just seen her kind of chronicle the way that she's training, and our girls are eager to jump on and kind of mimic that. And they're both such personable people that, they're really kind of benefiting from that mentorship that they're getting. It's been really, really beneficial for our girls and guys too.
Speaking of, you talked about the freestyle and how the girls are training that year round. Now you've got your wrestlers that come together and end up going to Fargo. And do they all represent Pennsylvania, or they represent their home states, or is that up to the athlete and the state association to determine who they want to represent?
Up to the athlete. We've never really been like, you have to come back. I mean, here's the reality. We've got 15-year-old kids here, and we're taking them away from home for 9 months. I'm not going to make them come back, for a month training camp or something like that. So if they're comfortable with their home training situation, then great. We'll see in Fargo. St. Darwin Hall plays for the cadets, and he's from Texas and freshman last year. And there's just no way I was making him come up and wrestle for Team PA. Mickey Reenan, when he was with us, always wrestled for Texas. But some kids would prefer to wrestle for PA, so we kind of deal with them individually. And as long as they're competing, we're not going to make a big deal out of it at this point in time.
Do any students stay through the summer, or are they just all go home?
Almost all of our boarders go home for the most part.
So how does the off-season workouts, what are the rules there? What can you do, or what can't you do as a coach with a wrestling program once the high school season ends?
We have a club. So they just are, all of our wrestlers join Excalibur. And then, we've got a bunch of good local kids that come in and train with us as well. So we coach them in the club context. And we head out to all the PAWF qualifiers. We go to the regionals. We go to just about everything there is to hit up. We had some kids at Field Juniors last year. We always go to Akron. But we're coaching them through kind of more of a club setting in the springtime.
Akron has really raised its profile with the advent or the re-advent of the Cadet Worlds about 7 years ago. Fargo is, of course, the monster that it always is. Where do you place the importance, especially on Fargo, which has been around, or the Cadet and Junior Nationals, juniors have been around since 1971, Cadet since 85, with the off-season wrestling? I mean, is it something that obviously you endorse it, but how do you talk to kids that maybe they just want to be folk stylers? They don't necessarily want to wrestle freestyle and Greco in the off-season.
I think I treat them as two separate sports in a lot of ways. The international styles and folk style. We do have some kids that go to Virginia Beach and flow nationals. But I think just being around our tradition, just seeing the number of kids that we've had on the world team, even if you come into SEM and you're like folk style only kind of guy, you're going to want to be a part of that. And it's so kind of, it's fun too. It's a lot more fun to be headed out to these tournaments and not have to worry about whether you're going to win the wrestle off to be on the team or stuff like that. Like, everyone just goes and competes. So, I think that we have groups of kids that every year are going to be threats to get on the world team. and we're going to really prioritize Akron for them. And that works out well, too, because we don't lose them. They don't go home for a while and come back like they do at Fargo. So there are definitely kids that have embraced that and are like, I'm going to be the next STEM guy to get on a world team. But we want our whole roster in Fargo, just from the standpoint of whether or not the best kids are coming there anymore, or all those debates that you see flying around. The marathon, the grind, the toughness aspect of Fargo, you can't match that anywhere else. It doesn't matter what tournament it is, and I think kids grow up a lot from being in that training camp and being out there and competing in both styles. And if they come home and they went 8-4 and they don't get on the podium either time, they're going to be better when they get back.
You've always been a supporter of Greco-Roman wrestling. What is it about Greco you feel is the most beneficial to high school wrestling and then freestyle as a result of competing in it?
Well, I don't really care about that, to be honest with you. I like Greco because I like Greco, not because I think it's going to make someone a better folk style wrestler or a better freestyle wrestler. I think that's kind of silly sometimes. I want guys that want to compete in Greco to train in Greco because I want them to win Fargo in Greco, and I want them to go to cadet or junior worlds in Greco. And if they get better at folk style because they train some Greco, well, I think that's really just kind of an ancillary benefit. Are there specific things that it makes you better at? Sure. I mean, our guys are good hand fighters because they wrestle 50 Greco matches every spring, maybe more. But and they have that upper body awareness. But when it comes to me, like sitting down and thinking through the process and saying if X guy wrestles more Greco, they'll get better at this for folk style, that doesn't happen. My guys that were training in Greco are doing it to get better at Greco-Roman.
And this goes to the old adage that summer wrestling makes winter champions. You have a different theory on that.
Yeah, maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. I don't really care. For us, like summer wrestling makes summer champions. You win Fargo in the summer. You win Akron pretty much in the summer. Worlds are going to be contested in the summer. So I'm not putting guys through summer training to make them better folk style wrestlers. I'm doing it so that they can win major championships in the summertime. And then if it benefits their folk style wrestling, that's a nice byproduct.
One of the reasons we're sitting down with Scott today is it was overdue that he was on the show. We're like, you haven't had it on the show yet. I was like, we'll do it in Fargo. And then I realized, the 15, 20 minutes that we get in Fargo when these coaches have breaks just wasn't going to be enough because we're still rolling on. Now I want to get to one of your favorite topics, and it is rankings, especially when it relates to high school athletes. And this is something that I had been doing since I was in Virginia back in the late 90s, all the way through Intermat when I left in 2008, especially ranking high schools. And one conversation we had on the old Matt.com forums back in the day, I was talking about looking at a match in freestyle or Greco and go, I'm looking at a match that's 1-0, 0-1, 1-0, for example, in the old ball draw era, which quite frankly sucked. But do I get a ranking out of that match? And since primarily the rankings are folk style, mostly, at least the way I looked at them in that era, you said, I'm not training my kid in a Greco match for folk style rankings or something to that effect. So how does that impact how you coach kids? Or do you tell them to look at the rankings, or you tell them to not look at the rankings? I mean, you spend fair enough time criticizing them as we see on Twitter.
Yeah, rankings are great, and they generate buzz around our sport, and you can't make kids not look at them. There's just no way. Parents are invested in them. Fans are invested in them. So that ship has sailed as far as that goes. But we teach kids to go out and compete and try to not worry about them. I think some of the stuff that you've seen recently with rankings, I'm not sure it has the strongest effect on kids. If that's what they're thinking about, and you can't deprogram that. Kids are always going to be thinking about them, but we try to reinforce day in, day out that results are going to be more important than where you're ranked. And of course, results begat rankings. I get all that, but it's a dangerous path that some parents and by effect some kids go down when that's their main part of their focus. I consider rankings very, very similar to seedings. One of the first conversations I had with a SEM wrestler, actually, when I showed up here, is we went to like a little tournament in New York, and he was seated second. And he came and he's like, "Coach, why am I seated second?" And I'm like, "Oh, does it matter? Why do you care?" And he's like, "Well, it's about respect." And I was like, "Well, that's kind of the wrong mindset, because it's not about respect. It's seedings use different criteria, rankers use different criteria. You've got folk free, and at the end of the day, you can't control where you're ranked, but you can control how you do on the mat. So some kids you have to really kind of shift up the focus for them, and other kids, they don't care. We had tons of kids that go out and just wrestle, and you tell them 20 minutes later that they just beat a kid that was ranked in the country, and they're like, "Oh, so we don't care," So I think the sooner you can get your athletes to adapt that mindset, that seedings and rankings aren't going to be anything that they need to worry about if they're doing what we tell them to, then I think that's a little better.
20 years ago, we just had basically Intermat and the magazines that were still out. I mean, the mat was in its formative stages and not really a ranking outlet. Now there's a litany of wrestling websites, a litany of rankings, especially on the college level. So how has that impacted your coaching and how has that evolved to say, hey, guys, like limit the distractions, or is it just kind of you've had the same theory the entire time?
Yeah, I'm not sure if my coaching has changed all that much. Alumni a lot of times want to know why kids aren't ranked. Parents definitely want to know why kids aren't ranked. And, the times that I've actually reached out to a ranker, I would say are few and far between. Maybe once in a while or something like that. But, our goal every year is not to be the number one ranked team in the country. Our goal is to win prep nationals. And our guys know that when they come in. Our goal is to win prep nationals every year. That's what we're training for as a team. And if other people think that's great and they rank us number one in the country, then that's a nice byproduct of that. And the alumni celebrate, and people write articles about it, and we get our picture on the front of some websites. But, we don't get a ring for being ranked number one during December of the season. We get a ring if we win preps. And that's an easy sell for kids because they know they can control that.
Now, speaking of rankings, you put this out on Twitter. This is at Sem Wrestling, which is Coach Green, your personal Twitter account. It's the Flow Personality Rankings. Is this the second or third year you've done this?
This is the second year. This is the second year I've done official rankings, and I think it's important to have that out there. I think that they need to be performing just like the student athletes are performing, and they need someone to evaluate them throughout the year.
All right, let's just go through these because these are all personalities we see at events. Number 10, you went with Joe Kania. He started working at out in the papers in New Jersey, then ended up with the Tampa Bay Bucks, and then back into the wrestling with Flow Sports. Number 10, Kyle Bratke. Number 9, as you put it, the dude in the Laker jersey, which is Nick Veliquette, although he did get your Fletcher reference.
I was excited about that. You see, you put something out on Twitter and you learn something. I found out what his real name was.
Yeah, but he got the Fletch reference, which I really was surprised about. So I think that might be a positive personality point for next year.
Yeah, for sure. Like knowing the Fletch reference is definitely huge.
You went Christian Pyle 7, Mark Bader 6, Mike Malanconico 5, Dan Lobdell, a.k.a. Wrestling Nomad, at 4, Ryan Holmes at 3, Willie Smalls, a.k.a. Willie Saylor, at 2, and then Yaroslav Andrew Spey at number 1. So when you concoct these things, you have the explanations there, but a little deep dive in why you ranked them the way you did.
Well, I think it's like the rankings for the student athletes. I had to reward the people who lay it on the line the most often, and I think the top two there were the ones that I saw sitting at the head table at Fargo for about 7 days straight. So I had to reward that. When push came to shove at the end, there was a lot of talent there, no question about it. There's a lot of ability, but those two guys were willing to go through the grind and be out there, for the entire time. I love what a lot of those guys bring to the table, and I'm excited to continue to evaluate them throughout the year. But I'm also very, very confident that I used my system and my algorithms to come out with some appropriate rankings for this year.
Yeah, so how good is an English teacher at algorithms? That's what I want to know.
I can spell it and use it in a sentence. So I think that's about as far as I want to go down that path.
Good enough. Now, I will say I did recruit Spay and Willie for my trivia team, Team Dream Crusher. We were at Herd and Horns, I think it was the Thursday, their normal trivia night out in Fargo, and they had wrestling-themed trivia, so it was a little bit of freestyle, a little bit of collegiate and high school, a lot more pro wrestling than I think I was anticipating. And we swept all 3 rounds, so I know Willie did celebrating about it. But
number 1 and number 2 ranked guys on your team, I think the expectations should be really high. So I'm glad that you guys lived up to them.
Yeah, I'll just say this. Willie did get the Andre the Giant question correctly. Spade did throw out the James Bond reference.
Would look at that and the fact that Willie got the Andre the Giant question correct and point out the multiple ironies that exist within that sentence.
Yeah, that was a good evening. We actually ended up giving away some of those gift cards that we won to some of the wrestlers that were floating around to help. I don't know if that counts as an impermissible benefit. Let's just I didn't catch any of their names, so nobody can report that. But Scott, you've been around the world of wrestling for a long time. You've been on this show now for the first time. Any other topics that you want to broach while you've got me on the horn here that we can, not necessarily wax poetic about, but general topics in wrestling that you think people need to pay more attention to?
Well, I'm curious how the weather is in New Brighton today. Number 1.
Well, I can go to my Twitter right now as we record this on a Friday morning as I get ready to head up to the lake. So that goes out on @JasonM Bryant every morning at 9:30. I did tweak it so it was giving you the weather updates from Fargo last week. So it's going to be a high of 79, a low of 58, mostly sunny. And you can subscribe to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast by going to MadTalkOnline.com/GetShortTime. That's exactly what the tweet reads every day, and I actually got a reply to it today.
Nice.
All right. Good deal. Good to know.
Well, that's knowing that, it saves me a trip to Twitter that I actually got it delivered directly from the proverbial horse's mouth. I can go on with my day not wondering what the weather was going to be like in Minnesota today.
Well, it's good to know. So, again, Scott Green at Sem Wrestling. Keep an eye on what they're doing. They've made a real competitive atmosphere there at National Preps. It's not just Blair and everybody else. It's Blair, Sem. I mean, Bishop Lynch had a run there for a little bit where they were challenging, but you get to see it more than just the Bucks. So it makes National Preps fun to watch, too, again.
It does. It's a great event. Anyone who's never been to it should really, mark that weekend on their calendar at Lehigh. So much tradition there, and it's always a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate the time.
Okay, Jason, I appreciate the call, and we'll look forward to seeing you out there on Twitter and seeing you in person, too.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to MadTalkOnline.com/GetShortTime to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or listen on your favorite podcatcher at MadTalkOnline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MadTalkOnline.com.